What is up, Packers fans? Happy Thursday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. It is Thursday. We've got a fun, nice, easy breezy episode. Today, we're going to be going over the Packers' biggest surprises and disappointments over this past 2024 season. And I'm going to be totally transparent with you for a moment. As I was thinking about putting this together, I'm like, what I really want to do or wanted to do going into it was put, one surprise, one disappointment, one surprise, one disappointment, which is exactly what we're going to do today. But as I went into it, I'm like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. I think there's just going to be way more disappointments than there are surprises. And I was pleasantly surprised that that was not the case. I think if you probably went player by player, there might be more disappointments than surprises, unfortunately. But it was not like I didn't do it of like, oh, I've got to even this out. I just kind of made a list of disappointments and made a list of surprises, and they equaled out. I had the exact same amount of each, which was very nice, and it worked out perfectly. But it wasn't necessarily what I expected going in. And I think again, we sort of get to the end of the season. It's 3 losses in a row at the end. You lose the playoff game. You lose that game to Minnesota and Chicago. And it all feels gross at the end of the year. And this is why I love doing this stuff. It just, even to be transparent again, for me personally, I love going back and looking at the season as a whole, because I think sometimes we get it, 99 times out of 100, the season's going to end with a loss. It's going to end with a bitter taste in your mouth. And when that's the case, it's really easy to tread into the negative and all the things that went poorly, all the things that went wrong. And instead, I think I just think it's a better, more holistic approach to kind of look at the entirety of the season, look at what went well, look at what went wrong, and then hopefully Green Bay can address those wrongs in the offseason, whether through self-improvement, some new coaches on the coaching staff, maybe some changes to the scheme and the design, some added players via free agency in the draft. There's going to be some heavy lifting. We've gone over some of those changes that Green Bay needs to make already. We'll continue to go through some options that Green Bay can sort of look through to see if there's ways to improve this roster. We'll get through all of that as this offseason goes along. But today, we'll spend the majority of our time looking at the surprises and disappointments. And I think you're going to enjoy the entirety of the list and really kind of going through and remembering like, oh yeah, there were actually some real positives with this season as well. Before we get there, we did have Ben Johnson's introductory press conference in Chicago. Little jab at Matt LaFleur, talking about the NFC North, the respect that he has for the coaches in the division, then went on to sing the praises of Dan Campbell and Kevin O'Connell, and then just said, and I've really enjoyed beating Matt LaFleur 2 times a year, to which the entirety of the room went completely quiet, and it was just crickets. And it was a weird, awkward, sort of cringeworthy moment, and it felt forced. Felt like, aha, I'm going to talk bad about the Packers. That's going to get me some points. And I'll be honest, I didn't watch the entirety of his press conference. I don't really care. It seemed like from what I saw, the snippets that I saw, it seemed like he handled it well. It seemed like he was pretty impressive. That was the one moment, though, at least that I saw, that definitely, and nothing to even do per se with Matt LaFleur or the Packers, just felt weird. It felt forced. Now, from a Packers standpoint, it's not like Matt LaFleur is going to be able to show, look at guys, he made fun of me. Like, let's play extra hard this week. I don't think there's anything like that. It's just, keep the rivalry going, whatever. But it was just a weird, awkward moment. Other than that, normal press conference, and we'll see, what that means for the Bears. It's probably going to mean same old Bears. But this is a good hire. It sounds like the defensive coordinator with Dennis Allen may not be totally finalized. It sounds like they may be bringing in some additional candidates as well. So we'll keep an eye on that. But a little bit of an awkward moment from Ben Johnson, and we'll see again what the Ben Johnson regime and era looks like in Chicago, and hopefully it just remains the exact same as it ever was. And just we can just sing the Bears still suck. Let's put it that way moving forward. That's the hope. Aaron Glenn, meanwhile, is the New York Jets head coach. This is a story for a couple different reasons. Number one, most importantly, from a Packers standpoint, Aaron Glenn is gone from the division. Aaron Glenn goes to the Jets. Ben Johnson's gone from Detroit. Of course, we just talked about he goes to Chicago. Their defensive line coach is now the Patriots defensive coordinator. Detroit is getting their top coaches sucked away and siphoned to other organizations. And that's certainly going to hurt Detroit, you would think. And there's no question about it. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, those are going to be 2 significant losses. So that's the big story. And then from a Jet standpoint, what's Aaron Glenn's appetite for bringing back an Aaron Rodgers? Is that something he wants to do, doesn't want to do? Of Of course, the front office and GM and everything will have a say in that as well. Aaron will have a say in that as well, meaning if he even wants to play this upcoming season. But that's an interesting side story for anybody that is still a fan of Aaron Rodgers or is just hoping that he plays in some capacity in 2025. All right, let's get to our main topic for today. Surprises and disappointments, as I mentioned. We're going to go one-to-one. Surprise, disappointment, so on and so forth. So let's start with our first surprise, and it just has to be Jeff Hafley's defense. That, to me, is the biggest surprise year over year, going from Joe Barry to Jeff Hafley. From that very first introductory press conference from Jeff Hafley, he impressed from day one. And I am not willing to look anyone in the eye and say, perfect defense, like they did it, one of the best 3-5 defenses in the league. I'm not quite there. I do think in some of the games or in the season's biggest moments against the Lions and the Vikings and the Eagles and the big opponents, they could not come up huge in those moments. I will say in the playoff game, they did everything they could to stay in that game. But in the regular season, against the toughest of opponents, they did struggle at times, especially in key moments, especially in end game scenarios. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but if I would have told you going into the season that this Packers defense ranked 6th in points per game allowed, 5th in yards allowed, 8th in yards allowed per play, 4th in takeaways, 7th in defensive DVOA, and 3rd in rushing yards per carry allowed, you would have signed up so fast and said, oh my God, they did it. They took that offense and now they have a top 10 defense or top maybe even 6-7 defense, and they're going to make a huge run. We saw the defense make massive strides, especially in run defense. We'll talk about the pass rush a little bit as well. It wasn't perfect. It definitely needed to do some things in some clutch games against some key opponents. It didn't happen that way, but I don't know how you look at anything from this Jeff Hafley defense in 2024 other than a massive improvement, an extremely pleasant surprise, and a huge step in the right direction for the Packers franchise and specifically their defense moving forward. By the way, I should have probably mentioned with Aaron Glenn getting the Jets job, it means that Jeff Hafley did not get the Jets job. And he, of course, by all accounts, will be back in Green Bay, meaning that there hasn't been any reports of him being involved in any of the other coaching searches. So right now it seems like Jeff Hafley will be back in 2025. But my biggest surprise in a very positive way, Jeff Hafley's first year defense and what it looks like that defense can be moving forward. On the flip side, my biggest disappointment here, and one of my, I guess, top noteworthy ones, inconsistency on offense, especially at the end of the season. I think we all had an expectation of what this offense was. I think we all had an expectation of what this offense could become, and it just failed to really meet those expectations. There was a game of, or a stretch of 5 games where they scored over 30 points per game, or at least 30 points per game. There were some good things that this offense did. Early on, it got explosives. The Malik Willis offense, certainly worked well. Jordan's injury impacted some things, but when they needed it most, especially at the end of the year, their offense just didn't cut it. And again, we have that bitter taste in our mouth from the end of the season and the offense just kind of completely sputtering out at the end. And I don't know if it was teams figuring it out or some injury issues or all of the above, but we all had expectations for the offense, and we all had expectations of what they could be and what they could become, and it just didn't hit that. And when you really, at the end of the season, lose games because of turnovers and lack of offensive production, that's not what we had planned for this version of the Green Bay Packers. So again, I don't know how you look at that, anything other than a disappointment, especially too, because now we're looking at, do they have the requisite wide receivers that they need? Who is the real Jordan Love? And do they need to add some depth to this offensive line and some, maybe even a legitimate starter or two? I think there's now more questions along the offense than we ever wanted to see. And I think that is a disappointment in a significant way. My next surprise, Edgerrin Cooper. I don't know how huge of a surprise this is. For anyone that watched Edgerrin Cooper in college, you knew what the upside was. But we've also seen Green Bay draft a lot of players with upside and never really come close to reaching it. Edgerrin Cooper in year one, we saw a lot of really high-end upside in Edgerrin Cooper, really from the get-go, as soon as he got a real opportunity. And he only expanded that as the course of the season went on. That is a massively positive thing to see from Edgerrin Cooper. we've been sort of talking about, and we may talk about it more at some point, of the lack of stars on this team, and Goody needing to hit a little bit better on his high draft choices to get these stars inside the building. Edgerrin Cooper has the ability to be a star, and at times looked like a star in 2024 as a second round rookie. As bullish as I was, and I think others were on Edgerrin Cooper, the high end upside that we saw was even higher, was even better. The pure unadulterated speed that he brings to the table is different. It's not coachable. And he got better and more instinctive, and just the game started to slow down for him a little bit as the season went along. And you add in a player where if he's got the instincts, we know he's got the playmaking, and the game starts to slow down, look out. He can be a top 3 linebacker in this league. Might take a little bit, but he has that potential. I wouldn't even put anything by him. I think he can be the best linebacker in this league. I don't want to put that on him per se, but he's that good. And he was a very impressive surprise this season. Disappointment has to be the wide receiver room. Has to be the wide receiver room. I said this a couple of days ago, but I would have bet everything that there was a 0% chance that not a single wide receiver takes a step forward. I would even said significant step forward, but any step forward in 2024. All of the receivers either stayed status quo or took a step back, and the receiver room as a whole took a major step back. And for so much hope and optimism in that room of what Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks and even guys like Bo Melton and Malik Heath and Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, for all the hope and excitement of what those players could become, the fact that nobody did, the fact that nobody stepped up, the fact that nobody took that next step in their progression as a wide receiver is extremely disappointing. And one of the ones that I just certainly did not see coming at all. And it changes the entire calculus of how you look at that wide receiver room going into 2025. So a huge disappointment there. On a flip side, or a more positive note, my next surprise, high-end play from Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. The fact that those two not only met the expectations of their contracts, but arguably far exceeded them. Man, we all had pretty high hopes for those two players. And I think both of them found a way to not only get there, but exceed it. For Xavier McKinney, all the turnovers, the consistent play, the locker room presence, mentoring the younger players, just everything, absolutely everything. For Josh Jacobs, when needed, putting the team on his back. We saw it against Jacksonville. We saw it really in the last game against Philly. He tried to do everything in his power. Just give me the ball, feed me. I'll make magic happen. More often than not, he did. It was a really fun season for both of them. I shudder to think what this team potentially would have looked like if there was no Josh Jacobs, if there was no Xavier McKinney. It would have looked a heck of a lot different. I don't know if they're a playoff team without those two. I don't think they are. Those are two huge free agent signings. And the fact that, again, not only did they live up to the hype, but they surpassed it is a beautiful thing and a very, very pleasant surprise. Disappointment, Romeo Doubs, and more specifically, the suspension. I don't want to go into this too much. It was a one-game thing. He moved on. The Packers moved on. I can certainly move on as well. But at the time, just knowing Romeo and knowing the situation, that was very surprising and very disappointing at the same time. So again, we don't need to get into it. It's past, it's gone, it's over. We can all forgive and forget. But at the time, it was an extremely disappointing situation. And hopefully everyone just learned from it and can move on. And it's a non-issue moving forward. Surprise, Sean Rhyan. To me, the player who took the biggest jump this past year. I've talked about his career trajectory already on numerous occasions, but the first year was an unmitigated nightmare. You have the suspension, the overweight start to training camp. You've got just everything going wrong. I mean, he was the 53rd guy in a 53-man roster and only was on there because he was a third-round pick. And he comes out a little bit out of shape again in 2023 and does not get any sort of real job, to the point where I thought he might get cut at the end of that camp. I know he's a third-round pick, but I still thought it was a possibility. They keep him around. He ends up rotating with John Runyon Jr., played okay at times, but to come back in 2024 and be the guy at right guard for the vast majority of the season and play as well as he did, arguably the most pleasant surprise of anyone on the team. Disappointment, more injuries for Jair Alexander and Christian Watson. The fact that both of them, once again, had major injuries and just could not stay out on the field. That's the definition of disappointing. I mean, Jair would have been a huge help in those games against Detroit, Minnesota, Philadelphia down the stretch, and they just couldn't get him on the field. And for Christian Watson, just when you thought, after he went to Madison last year and got some of the stuff behind him, he tears his ACL. It's brutal. It sucks all the way around. There's a massive level of disappointment that goes into that. But the fact that there are more injuries for those two, and to the point now where it looks like Jair might be gone. Christian might play a handful of games next year, and that might be it for him with Green Bay. Two very, very, very promising careers at one point that just have not gone according to plan. And a large part of that is actually due to the injuries. Surprised Malik Willis. I don't know that we need to go into it too much. It sort of speaks for itself. A flyer late seventh round pick for a third quarterback in Tennessee that they didn't want anything to do with, that they were willing to basically give away for nothing. Green Bay says, all right, we'll take him. The ability to move on from Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt at the time. I know Clifford is back now and stayed the season on the practice squad, but the fact that Goody was able to move on, say, you know what, I'm good. We can get somebody better than Willis going in and winning 3 games for this team, 2 as a starter, 1 as a fill-in for Love in that Jacksonville game. Really, really impressive stuff from Malik Willis and certainly deserving to be on this list. Disappointment, I'm going Luke Musgrave, and a couple different things here. From an injury standpoint, it really sucks that he was injured again. From a just play on the field standpoint, and I get he had to ramp back up from injury, but even going back to camp preseason, when he played early in the season, when he played late in the year, I just didn't see the dynamic playmaking ability that I wanted to see from Luke Musgrave. I haven't seen anything from Luke in the 2 years that he's played now, or at least half played, or probably a quarter of the time played. Just haven't seen anything that really gives me the excitement that I had about him coming out of college. I think he can play so much better. Tight end's a really tough position to learn in the NFL. Hopefully year 3 can be healthy and more productive for Luke Musgrave, but it was disappointment that he just never really could get it going. Surprise, we can go back a little bit to the defense with Jeff Hafley, but the run defense, 4.0 yards per carry allowed, behind only the Ravens and the Broncos, the best in the NFC. And I didn't recognize this until I looked at this today. They didn't allow a single 40-yard plus rushing gain all season long. One of only 4 teams to do that. Only 4 teams did not allow a 40-yard or greater run during the course of the season. Green Bay was one of them. Now, potentially would have on that Saquon Barkley run at the end of the playoff game, right? But that game was no longer in the balance. Philly had already won. Kudos to Saquon for sliding down. But if he had broken that one, that would have been the first run over 40 yards all season long. Disappointment on the flip side has to be the pass rush, right? Listen, they were still 10th in sacks, but almost all those sacks came in about 3 or 4 games against bad teams in garbage time. They were not consistent enough. And against the good teams, against the good offensive lines, they just could not get pressure at all. So we know it. We've talked about it, but that is another major disappointment for Green Bay. Surprise has to be Evan Williams. You spend a 4th round pick on Evan Williams and you get a player of that caliber. They moved up in the 4th round. It was often discussed as a poor move for Green Bay at the time. That doesn't look so bad anymore, right? Looks like he is really going to be a playmaker in this league, starting safety, and I could not be more excited about his progress and who he is as a player. I think he's going to be a big time player in Green Bay for the foreseeable future. Disappointment on the other side has to be Tyron Hopper. 3rd round pick, just couldn't get on the field despite injuries and to Quay Walker at times, and getting some potential playing time opportunities. He just couldn't get on the field. Couldn't get on it. I think he played around 15 snaps. Looked okay. Looked fine. But the fact that you spent a 3rd round top 100 pick on Tyron Hopper, which seemed like a reach at the time, and he doesn't contribute in year 1, we'll see. I still think there's a player there. Hopefully he can contribute a lot more in year 2, but year 1 did not go according to plan for Tyron Hopper. Surprise has to be Brandon McManus. You find him off the street, I get for reasons, right? But to get him off the street and have him perform as well as he did, I know he missed that field goal at the end of the season, but on the whole, he was phenomenal for Green Bay and easily the special teams MVP. Big time pickup there for Goody. Disappointment, going 1-5 in the division. No 2 ways around that. Should have been 0-6, and or at least could have been 0-6. Kudos to Carl Brooks for getting the field goal block on the 1, but 1-5 is not going to cut it. It's not good enough. They have to be better, and Matt LaFleur and company are going to have to spend a lot of time really looking at Chicago, Minnesota, and Detroit, what they do well, what Green Bay can do to counterbalance it, because you can't have another season going 1-5 in the division. It's going to ultimately kill you. And just even again, having the number 7 seed in the playoffs because they didn't do better in the division, I think that really hurt Green Bay as well. Definitely a disappointment. Surprise, Chris Brooks. It's a player that Miami jettisoned and was just out there chilling. And Green Bay's like, yeah, we'll bring you in. Brings him into the practice squad, quickly brings him up to the active roster. And they found a good running back, their best pass protecting back. They use him in that pony package because he can basically be used as a fullback in those situations. Can catch the ball to the backfield. And of course, he's a good runner too. Really awesome pickup from Goody and deserving of that spot and a huge surprise this past season. Disappointment, Jordan Love's final few games. It goes along with the offense. It goes along with everything. But he did not perform up to the level that he is capable of. Injuries may have played a part. We're never going to probably know. But either way, we saw some really good stuff from Jordan Love in those last few games, and it just did not repeat itself in that final game. And he will be judged for his clutch performances in the last 2 playoff games, San Francisco and Philly. He played very poor games for a good chunk of against San Francisco, including the interception at the end, and really played poorly against Philadelphia, one of the worst games of his career. So that's definitely a level of disappointment. And then last but not least, a surprise, the Vikings, Lions, and Bears combined for 0 playoff wins. The disappointment, the Packers also failed to win a playoff game. That's going to be their next, jump for this team. They got to go not only win 1 game, but at least 2 games in the playoffs next year, be better against the division. There are high expectations for this team, as Goody mentioned in his press conference at the end of the season. There's got to be a sense of urgency. We'll see if Brian Gutekunst heeds those words. Hopefully he will, but it's time, to quote the late great Kevin Green, it is time. I want to see them get out there, be winning playoff games. Didn't happen this year, needs to happen in 2025. All right, just to recap everything, my surprises and disappointments. We'll do surprises first. Jeff Hafley's first year defense, easy for me to say. Edgerrin Cooper, high-end play from Jacobs and McKinney, Sean Ryan, Malik Willis, run defense, Evan Williams, Brandon McManus, Chris Brooks, and the Vikings, Lions, and Bears combining for 0 playoff wins. And then the disappointments, inconsistency on offense at the end of the year, the wide receiver room, Romeo Dobbs suspension, more injuries for Jair and Watson, Luke Musgrave, pass rush, Tyron Hopper, and the 1-5 games in the division. And of course, going 0-1 in the playoffs as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I will be right back here tomorrow. We'll have an all new topic. I will let you know what it is when I know what it is. Actually, I have my whole list again of things that I want to talk about. Just don't know which one it is. And maybe we get news on Thursday as well. So we'll go over it. Check it out. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews. We always appreciate that a ton. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Wong, Ronaldo Espinoza, Peter Ritaka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Guestford, Step Keat, Love and Football, Dylan Pat Scott, Bobby Santoro, SoCal Pack, Allison Tuckwab, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, and Ian Ewing. I will see you guys tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.